Let's talk about the theater director, which is one of the weirdest things for me to talk about because that's me. One of the things I'm most interested in for obvious reasons, but also a little strange because when I kind of go over notes about theater directing, um, while they make a lot of sense in general, my life is different than a typical theater director because I'm a specific theater director and everybody's different. And you should remember in this class and in every class, then when we talk about what a director does or what a costume designer does or what a chemist does or what a plumber does, we are talking about a general um, sense of what a lot of them do, but everybody's different. Human beings are different. The world is different. And knowing generally what people do and how they do it is important and necessary, but it's not quite the same as knowing what people's actually lives are. I could talk a lot about what students do, college students. That'd be an interesting subject, at least to me, but you'd be different. You'd be in a slightly different basket if we did that than all other college students because you're special and unique. And no one is quite like you. And it's a little bit the same with actors, directors, and everybody we talk about in the theater. All right, let's talk a little bit about what the theater director is. It's an unusual one in some ways um, because, as you'll discover when you're doing some reading, the theater director is new. It's only like the concept of having a director, as we currently defined it, is only about 150 years old. Came about in the late 18th century. Now, the things that a theater director does, which is to organize a play, to focus a play, to provide leadership and oversight of a play, obviously that those things always happened since the Greeks 2,500 years ago. But they've been done by different people over time. Sometimes a leading actor, sometimes the person who was putting up the money for the show, sometimes the leading religious figure, if the play was essentially a religious function. Um, Sometimes someone who's kind of like all of those. Shakespeare was probably somewhat in charge of the productions in his troupe, and he was the playwright and an actor of kind of smaller parts. Um, but a director is fairly new in the theater, or at least a director like me, or like some of the people you're going to watch videos of in this module. Um, and what's also particularly interesting that you're going to read about in terms of the director is that one way to think about the director is that they're the most important person in a theatrical production, and that there's just one of them, and they're kind of in charge of a lot of things. But they're also the only person you can't see when you go to see a play. You get to see the actors, you get to see the work of the designers, you get to see the work of all the people who built the sets and the costumes. Um, but the director and then the management personnel, stage managers, and things like that, you don't see them at all. Their effect is felt a lot when you see a play, hopefully, um, but they're not on stage taking a bow at the end. They're not on stage at any point during the play. The director is responsible and connected to every single aspect of the play, but they're never directly creating that thing that you are seeing. They are not up on the stage acting. They are not building um, the piece of scenery or the prop or creating the music effect or playing the music or whatever it is. So it's a really interesting role, at least to me, because I'm a director. Um, Directors are kind of in charge of organizing the scheduling of a play. They're in charge of the acting. They're in charge of the designers, who then, through their people who work with them, create all the visual and musical and lighting aspects of the play. They're in charge of the staging, which is where literally things are on the stage and what happens when and who comes on and how they're placed in relationship to one another. There's a charge of the technical operations of the play, which happens right at the very end of the rehearsal process through what is called technical rehearsals. Um, and yet they're invisible once the play actually starts. A lot of times when I direct a play, I go to opening night and then I leave town. and the play will run for 6 weeks or however long that play is scheduled to run, and I'm not around. When I get a chance, I like to go back and see how it is after a couple of weeks and talk to all the actors and crew members who've become my friends during that process, who I worked so closely with. But a lot of times I'm just like gone. In college production at CRC, for instance, where you're taking this class, I am around quite a bit once the play opens, kind of continuing to be a teacher because that's part of the director's job at a college production. Um, but not always. A lot of the times the work is done and the play continues on under the supervision of a stage manager, um, and I'm on to direct the next play, hopefully. Um, I mentioned right at the beginning that the history of the director is a little unusual in that there's been actors. In fact, the emergence of actors, as you learned in the Greek period, is how we chart the beginning of theater. Once we have actors telling a story, we have something that we can consider theater. The director is new. It came about in the 19th century. Um, Largely because of the desire for more realistic in theater in Europe and Russia, and in particular, the desire to organize the play into something that felt as much like life as possible, and to have someone in charge who could look at all these elements and place them together into the most realistic possible um, version of the play. Um, a lot of times, a dude named Georg II, the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, is credited as being the first modern director in the same way that Thespis is credited as being the first actor. Um, and the Russian and sort of Northern European desire for realism, as evidenced in the plays of Chekhov and the work of the great acting teacher Stanislavski, is responsible for the kind of need for someone who can supervise all these elements and keep an eye on making theater as representational and realistic as possible. Um, in the PowerPoint notes from Robert Kahn that you see, it will say that theater directors have three historical phases: teacher directors, um, directors of realism, and directors of anti-realism. And that's a good enough way to think about it, and you should review those notes. Basically, the idea is that teacher directors represents, there's always been someone around to say how we should do the play, whether it's the playwright or the producer or the lead actor or whoever, and they weren't called a director, but they fulfilled some aspects of that. And sometimes it would be two or three different people on any one production or any one historical period of a play. The directors of realism are these folks that I'm talking about, as exemplified by the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, who created a formula and a company that could create the most realistic, believable possible parts of theater. And then the third thing he mentioned is the directors of anti-realism, which is that once theater in the 20th century starts to turn to absurdism and surrealism and musical theater and all sorts of things that aren't very realistic, the director becomes the person who creates these theatrical, um, outsized theatrical feelings and experiences and spectacle and things like that. And in the 20th century, really for like the last 100 years or so, is when the director has become in a really controlling aspect of theatrical plays. Um, what does the director actually do? You're going to watch quite a few videos and read quite a few little short articles and outlines that are going to tell you about that. But at some point, the director either chooses to be in the play or gets chosen to direct the play. Sometimes I get hired. Someone call me up and say, "Would you like to come to such and such a place and direct such and such a play? And here's what we'll pay you." Other times, like for maybe with CRC, they will say, "What play would you like to do? We would like you to direct a play in the summer of 2024. What play would you like to do? What play do you think would be good for our students and our audience?" Um, the person who actually provides the money and the opportunity and the place for that play is not the director. The producer, like on Broadway, it produces the money people. They're the ones who hire the director and hire the designers and hire the actors. In the case of Cosumnes River College, the producer is the Cosumnes River College Theater Department. They're the ones who are paying me. They're the ones who are choosing to do the kind of plays that they do, and the director works for them. In the case of a lot of places I work for, it's a theater company. It's a community theater or a small professional theater company who are doing a season of plays, and they want a certain kind of play in a certain slot. They want a holiday play for the Christmas time, or they want a big musical done in the summer. And they will say they're the ones who have the ability to pay people and who are going to take in the money from the box office and from selling things, selling tickets to the show. And the director is quite a different person. The director is not in charge of paying for the play or in receiving the money. They're the one who's in charge of the artistic and practical elements of the play. Quite different than the producer. It's confusing because in England they sometimes call what we call a director a producer. Um, and so you'll hear English people refer to the producer, and what they mean is what we call the director, the person in charge of the artistic functions and the practical functions of producing a play, not in charge of creating the environment where a play can be produced and producing them and creating providing the money and things like that. Um, Directors collaborate with a lot of people to produce a play. Um, you've probably heard me before in these lectures that theater is sometimes called the collaborative art. You need a lot of people to produce a play, actors and people who build things and people who create things and people who are the crew backstage and people who sell the tickets and people who are the ushers. A lot of people involved in producing play, and the director is sort of the coordinator and head collaborator of all those people. Usually they're involved in play selection in some regard. Either they agree to do a play that someone offers them to do, or they help to choose the play. They decide very frequently, while talking to a lot of other people, what is the concept of the play? What's the conceptualization? How are we going to do this play? If we're doing Shakespeare, are we going to do it in modern dress? Are we going to do it in traditional Shakespearean dress? Are we going to do it set in space? Are we going to do it in a really short 1 hour version with only 5 actors? Are we going to do it in a whole 4 hour original non-cut version with 40 actors? How are we going to, what is the way we're going to approach this particular script? And that can apply to contemporary and realistic and scripts from all time periods. If you're going to do a musical, you can do a really big musical with a full orchestra and 40 dancers in the chorus, or you can do a different version with a taped accompaniment and only a certain number of performers on stage who play all the roles. So the director is at the head of determining that. Sometimes they work with a person called a dramaturg, Dramaturg, and that person is in charge of helping with research and information about the play and the dramatic analysis of the script in question that's going to be done, and then providing that to the director to help the play work better. Dramaturgs are pretty rare nowadays because they are another thing that costs money, and theater is mainly done in the cheapest possible way nowadays. Theater is not in a period where they can afford to spend a lot of money on a lot of different people. But at the biggest, fanciest theaters, they still frequently have dramaturgs. Directors select and collaborate with designers, or sometimes not. Sometimes I'll go into a play as a director and be told, here's the play we're going to do. We've already got a person on our staff who's going to do costume design. We've already hired a person for the season to do set design. We still need to find a lighting designer, but it's going to be one of these 2 people. And they will say, do you want to work with this team? And I'll say either yes or no, or any director would say either yes or no. Other times the director will help choose the design team. They will say, who would you like to get to do the sets for this play? The director is the head of that team once it's established: the set, lights, costumes, properties, sound designers. Their job is to turn ideas from all these different collaborative artists that they're working with into actual ideas, decide which ideas to keep and which to move forward with and which to leave behind. Obviously, one of the most important things that a director either does or occasionally doesn't do is to cast the show. Actors are incredibly important to the director. They're incredibly important to the audience. They're incredibly important to making the play good or bad or work or not work. And a lot of times the director's involved in casting, choosing who they want. Usually, when I'm a director, I'm the head of casting. I make the decisions on who will be in the play. But if you're doing a Broadway play, some of the casting is done because the producer wants to get a big star. And they will say, hey, we got Hugh Jackman to play the lead in this play, through to the director. And the director might have an opinion about Hugh Jackman, but they're probably going to take Hugh Jackman because it's a big star and it's going to bring, or Christian Chenoweth or Bernadette Peters or whoever it is, they're going to bring a certain amount of audience to the thing. And then once in a while, I've directed plays that are far away from where I live, and they will actually, and it's at a college, so they want to cast the people in their department who they want to reward for their good work or whatever, and I will go into a cast that has already been chosen for me. That's pretty rare, though. Most directors, most of the time, are involved in casting, and it's about the most important thing they do. At least one of the most important things they do. Another most important thing that directors do is that they're in charge of rehearsals. The process of I used to always say 6 weeks, but sometimes rehearsals are a lot longer, and now sometimes rehearsals are much shorter. A lot of professional theaters now have gone to either 3.5 or 2.5 even week rehearsals because they can't afford to pay the actors. Actors get paid during the rehearsal just like they do during the performance period, and rehearsal periods sometimes in professional theater now have become really tight, really short, and you have to get a lot done. Now you're rehearsing all day in those situations for 2.5 or 3.5 weeks, but it is real. 3.5 is really tight for a full length play. 2.5 is nuts, to be frank. But sometimes that's what you get because that's what the theater in question can afford. Um, During rehearsal, you determine the questions of staging, which is literally where human beings are going to be on the stage during the production. It's called blocking in the theater world. The director works with the actors to make them better, to provide an atmosphere where they can be at their best and do the best possible work that they are capable of doing. Of pacing is an important question. It's something I care about a lot. I am a fiend for pacing in my shows and how that affects in terms of the tempo at which the thing goes and in keeping actors on their toes and keeping audiences engaged in the material. I think that pacing is incredibly important, and I do a lot of exercises and types of rehearsals meant to address pacing. Bringing all the actors and the design elements and the management people together is a huge job of the director. Um, and at some point, creating a whole unified production that can then be turned over to the audience using all these people who are building sets and um, acting and singing and dancing and making costumes and putting people into costumes and working backstage to operate special effects or whatever it is. The director is coordinating all those folks through the rehearsal process and through the design and production process into a group who can actually into an event that is actually a play that you want on opening night for an audience to see. Um, how does one become a director? Well, it's less clear than almost any other job in the theater. Almost every director I've ever known starts in some other role in the theater. I started as an actor. I'd say more than half of theater directors start as actors. Some start in sort of management functions. I know a director who was an English professor and who was a specialist in Shakespeare and who came to directing plays in that way because she had a lot of knowledge and specialty. I actually think she's not a great director, but that's just my opinion. Some other people like that. Um, some people come out of other disciplines or go into other disciplines. A lot of the biggest, most famous theater directors also direct films or direct in television. And then some of the most famous film and television directors eventually try their hand at theater directing as well. They're quite different, but obviously they're very much related. Um, Many directors go through training programs. frequently MFA programs where after 4 years of college, where you study theater in maybe a more general way, you specialized in a 2 or 3 year program at a college theater department where you get what's called a Master of Fine Arts and you focus only on directing. But a lot of directors don't do that. A lot don't do that. The stuff that directors have to learn, either through a specific program or through their own education and work as assistant directors and as stage managers, as an actors and as crew members and as whatever it is that work they do as they're trying to get to the point where someone actually lets them direct a full play, is that they have to work on uh, knowing the history and the traditions of theater. They need to work on knowing how to work with actors. Um, they need to work on the development of imagination and creativity. They need to work on what Cohen calls intellectual conceptualization, which means to take a play script and be able to say, okay, this is what this actually means. This is what this actually represents. Um, they need to work on being familiar with the design and acting process. I would say that the best directors are also quite competent actors and quite competent in some areas of design so that they could do everybody else's job in the theater if they had to. I certainly want that to be the case with me. Whether it's true or not, someone else would judge, but that's my goal, is that I could do most everybody's job at least okay. They need to be sensitive communicators in terms of personal relationships. I've spent many hours sitting with actors or other people involved in productions, just trying to coax them through life so that they can get to the point where they can direct. I frequently have functioned as a counselor or as a guide or as just a friend to people, that allows them to get to the point where they can actually act or do the work they need to do. I have mediated many disputes. I have tried to keep a company of actors, not all of whom get along all the time, working together as a group and keeping them from freaking out about the things we are doing. Um, and directors have to have excellent listening and communication skills. They have to be able to tell what's going on, decide what to do about it, and then communicate that to a group of people. Um, and directors have to know everything there is to know about theater. That's a little bit of a overstatement and maybe self-aggrandizing because I am a director, but the best directors um, are have under their command a ton of knowledge, a ton of different skill sets, and then they use all those to enable the people who are actually going to do the things like act in the play and design the play and run the play to do their job better. So it's a complicated, interesting profession, and a lot of people are really great at it, and some others kind of just get away with it because they have talented people under them, and they may not be a great director, but they're able to um, coast on the abilities of the people who actually have talent, the actors and the playwright and the people who are creating the show. And We'll end there. Obviously, I would talk about directors forever and ever and ever if I could, because all of us are interested in the thing that we are. But watch the videos about the other directors that are in this module and read the information provided. And Good luck thinking about the coolest possible person in the world, the theater director.